Dog barked at woman's belly for 6 months, and when the family saw the scan, they broke down crying. It started with something everyone thought was silly. Every time this pregnant woman walked into the hospital, the therapy dog locked onto her belly and barked like he was trying to warn her. Doctors laughed. Her family brushed it off. But the dog wouldn't stop. Not for 6 long months. And then her body started giving her strange signals no one could explain. That's when a quiet vet stepped in and realized the dog wasn't acting random at all. Something inside her, something no one wanted to believe, was setting him off. When she finally collapsed, the truth they'd ignored came crashing out in one haunting scan that made the whole family fall apart. What was the dog trying to warn them about? And why didn't anyone listen until it was almost too late? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Memorial Hospital's East Wing, casting warm patches across the freshly polished floors. Laurel King walked slowly down the corridor, one hand resting on her growing belly beneath her flowered maternity dress. After years of disappointment and heartache, the gentle swell of her stomach still felt like a miracle. She paused to catch her breath, letting her fingertips trail along the cool wall. At 6 months pregnant, even simple walks took more effort now. But she didn't mind. Every twinge, every moment of fatigue was a reminder of the precious life growing inside her. "There's our favorite visitor," called out Nancy, one of the regular nurses from the reception desk. "And look who else is here today." Laurel's face lit up as she spotted Ranger, the hospital's therapy dog, sitting perfectly poised beside his handler. The German Shepherd's amber eyes were alert but gentle, his bearing as dignified as always. Laurel had seen him during several of her prenatal visits and had grown fond of his calm presence. "Hi, Ranger," she said softly, taking a few steps closer. The dog's tail wagged slightly in recognition, but something seemed different today. His ears pricked forward, his nose twitching as he caught her scent. Without warning, Ranger leapt to his feet. A deep, urgent bark erupted from his throat. Not his usual friendly greeting, but something almost frantic. He stared intently at Laurel's belly, barking again and again, each sound more insistent than the last. Laurel stumbled backward, her heart racing. "What's wrong?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She'd never seen the normally composed therapy dog act this way. "Ranger, heel!" his handler commanded, quickly bringing him back under control. "I'm so sorry about that, Mrs. King. I don't know what got into him." Several staff members had gathered, drawn by the commotion. A few chuckles rippled through the small crowd. "Maybe he smells those pickle and peanut butter sandwiches you've been craving," teased one of the nurses, drawing more laughter. Laurel forced herself to smile, though her hands were trembling. "Yes, maybe that's it," she managed to say. But deep inside, a knot of worry had formed. She'd always trusted animals' instincts, and something about Ranger's reaction felt deeply wrong. Later that evening, she sat at her kitchen table, pushing food around her plate while trying to find the right words to explain her concerns to her husband, Blake, and his mother, Denise, who had come over for dinner. "I just can't shake the feeling that something's not right," Laurel said quietly. "You should have seen how Ranger reacted. It wasn't normal." Blake reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Honey, dogs bark sometimes. That's what they do." His voice was gentle but dismissive. "You can't let every little thing worry you." "Little thing?" Laurel's voice quavered. "Blake, you weren't there. This wasn't just regular barking. It was like he was trying to warn me about something." Denise set down her fork with a sharp click. "Now really, Laurel," she said, her tone carrying that familiar note of criticism that always made Laurel shrink inside. "You're working yourself up over nothing. That dog probably just wanted attention. You know how high-strung you've been lately." "I'm not being high-strung," Laurel protested, but her voice came out small and uncertain. "I just think maybe we should mention it to Dr. Parker at my next appointment." Blake and his mother exchanged a look that Laurel had seen too many times before, the one that said they thought she was being overly emotional and irrational. "Sweetheart," Blake said, using the tone one might use with an upset child, "everything's fine. All your tests have been normal. The baby's healthy. Why would you want to worry Dr. Parker over a dog barking?" Laurel pressed her lips together, fighting back tears. She'd hoped that after all their years of trying for a baby, after all the doctors who hadn't taken her fertility concerns seriously until it was almost too late, Blake would have learned to listen to her intuition. But here she was again, her fears being dismissed, her feelings minimized. "You're right," she said finally, though the words felt like rocks in her throat. "I'm probably just being silly." Denise nodded approvingly. "That's better. No sense borrowing trouble. Now, eat your dinner before it gets cold." Laurel obediently picked up her fork, but each bite tasted like ash. As the conversation moved on to other topics, she sat quietly, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Inside her mind, Ranger's urgent barking echoed again and again. That night, lying in bed, she tried to convince herself that everyone was right. Dogs did sometimes bark for no reason. All her prenatal checkups had been perfect. The baby's movements were strong and regular. There was no logical reason to worry. But as she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with Ranger's amber eyes, intense and knowing, trying desperately to tell her something she couldn't quite understand. She woke several times, her hand instinctively going to her belly, checking that everything was okay. In the soft darkness, she whispered to her unborn child, "I'll keep you safe, little one. I promise." Even if no one else would listen to her concerns, she knew she had to trust her instincts. Tomorrow, she decided, she would call Dr. Parker's office herself. Maybe the doctor would dismiss her too, but she had to try. She owed her baby that much. The memory of Ranger's behavior stayed with her, a persistent warning she couldn't ignore. Through years of infertility treatments, she'd learned the hard way that sometimes you had to fight to be heard, had to stand up for yourself even when others thought you were overreacting. This time, with her baby's well-being at stake, she wouldn't let anyone's doubts silence her. As she finally fell into an uneasy sleep, her last conscious thought was of Ranger's urgent barking and the absolute certainty in his posture as he'd focused on her belly. Whatever it meant, she knew one thing for sure. That wasn't the behavior of a dog simply wanting attention. Ranger had been trying to tell her something important, and she intended to find out what it was. Laurel walked through the hospital's gleaming corridors, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting warm patterns on the polished floor. She was here for another routine checkup, trying to push away the lingering unease from Ranger's strange behavior last week. As she rounded the corner toward the obstetrics wing, she heard the familiar click of dog nails on the tile floor. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Ranger padding along beside his handler, visiting patients as part of the therapy program. The German Shepherd's usually calm demeanor changed the instant he caught sight of her. Ranger's entire body went rigid. His ears stood straight up, and his amber eyes locked onto her midsection with an intensity that made Laurel's skin prickle. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. "Ranger, heel," his handler commanded. But for the first time since Laurel had known him, the usually obedient dog ignored the command completely. The growl grew louder, and before anyone could react, Ranger lunged forward, straining against his leash, his focus laser-locked on Laurel's pregnant belly. Several people in the hallway gasped and stepped back, "I'm so sorry," the handler apologized, struggling to control the large dog. "He's never done anything like this before." Dr. Conrad Hale, who had been walking past with a clipboard in hand, stopped to observe the scene. His forehead creased as he watched Ranger's behavior with keen interest. The veterinarian's quiet presence seemed to go unnoticed by everyone else, but his eyes never left the German Shepherd. Laurel's hands trembled as she pressed them against her abdomen. "It's okay," she said automatically, though her voice shook. "He did something similar last week." Dr. Marjorie Klein emerged from a nearby exam room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "What's all this commotion about?" she demanded, her crisp white coat rustling as she approached. "Dr. Klein, it's Ranger again," Laurel explained, her words tumbling out. "He's acting so strange around me. Do you think maybe we should run some extra tests? Just to be sure everything's—" "Mrs. King," Dr. Klein cut her off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We've been over this. Your pregnancy is progressing normally. All your tests are perfect." She turned to address the small crowd that had gathered. "It's just hormones, everyone. Pregnant women often get a bit anxious." The way she emphasized the word anxious made Laurel's cheeks burn. She saw several people nodding in understanding, a few even smiling indulgently at her apparent overreaction. "But Dr. Klein," Laurel persisted, even as her voice grew smaller, "Ranger's a trained therapy dog. He's never acted this way with anyone else." "Mrs. King," Dr. Klein's tone turned sharp, "I've been delivering babies for 20 years. I think I know a bit more about pregnancy than a dog." She softened her voice, though her eyes remained cold. "These hormonal concerns are completely normal. Why don't we get you into the exam room and check on that baby?" From his position near the wall, Dr. Hale's eyes narrowed slightly. He watched as Ranger continued to strain against his leash, even as his handler finally managed to lead him away. The dog's behavior was far from normal, and Conrad knew it. He'd worked with medical detection dogs for years before taking this position, and there was something deliberately targeted about Ranger's response. In the exam room, Dr. Klein went through the motions of the checkup with brisk efficiency. "Heart rate is perfect. Measurements are right on track," she announced, moving the ultrasound wand across Laurel's belly. "See? Nothing to worry about?" Laurel tried to focus on the grainy image on the screen, to take comfort in Dr. Klein's confident assertions. But she couldn't shake the memory of Ranger's intense reaction, the desperate way he'd tried to communicate something. "Should we maybe do some additional scanning?" Laurel ventured timidly. "Just to be thorough?" Dr. Klein's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. King, I understand that first-time mothers often have anxiety, but you need to trust me. I'm not going to order unnecessary tests just because a dog barked at you. That would be completely unprofessional." Laurel nodded mutely, feeling thoroughly chastised. As she left the exam room, she nearly bumped into Dr. Hale, who was still lingering in the hallway, making notes on his clipboard. "Mrs. King," he called softly, causing her to pause. "How long has Ranger been reacting to you this way?" "Just the past week or so," she replied, grateful that someone was finally asking. "It's like he's trying to tell me something, but—" She trailed off, embarrassed to be voicing her fears again. Conrad nodded thoughtfully, his pen hovering over his notes. "And it's only around your abdomen? Nowhere else?" "Yes, that's right. He seems completely normal until he notices my pregnancy, and then he just changes." Dr. Hale made another note, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you, Mrs. King. That's helpful information." As Laurel walked away, Conrad stared down at his notes, a furrow deepening between his brows. In his years of working with medical detection dogs, he'd learned to trust their instincts. Dogs like Ranger were trained to recognize specific physiological changes, changes that sometimes preceded visible symptoms. The fact that Ranger was displaying such consistent, targeted behavior was setting off alarm bells in Conrad's mind. He watched Laurel's retreating form, noting the slight slump of her shoulders, the way her hand never left her belly. Dr. Klein might be confident in dismissing Ranger's behavior, but Conrad wasn't so sure. He'd seen too many cases where animals picked up on things that humans, even experienced medical professionals, had missed. Making his way to his office, Conrad pulled up his research on canine medical detection. He had a feeling he'd be doing some extra reading tonight. Something about this situation wasn't sitting right, and he intended to figure out exactly what Ranger was trying to tell them before it was too late. In the parking lot, Laurel sat in her car, fighting back tears of frustration. She felt small and foolish, exactly as Dr. Klein had made her feel. But underneath the embarrassment, that whisper of fear remained, growing louder with each passing day. She tried to push it away, to trust in Dr. Klein's expertise and confidence, but Ranger's desperate attempts to warn her kept playing through her mind. She started her car, attempting to focus on the positive aspects of the appointment. Normal heartbeat, good measurements, everything on track. But as she drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being missed, something that only Ranger seemed able to detect. The question was, would anyone listen before it was too late? The morning sun filtered through the hospital windows as Laurel made her way down the familiar corridor. 3 weeks had passed since Ranger's first alarming reaction, and each visit only seemed to intensify the German shepherd's strange behavior. Today was no different. The moment Ranger spotted her from across the waiting room, his whole body went rigid. His handler, Sarah, tightened her grip on the leash as the dog's normally calm demeanor transformed into one of urgent distress. His amber eyes locked onto Laurel's growing belly, and the barking began, deep, insistent barks that echoed through the space. "Oh, look who's got a four-legged admirer again," one of the nurses called out with a laugh. Several other staff members joined in the playful teasing, their amusement evident in their expressions. Laurel forced a weak smile, her cheeks burning. The sharp ache in her lower abdomen, a new development over the past few days, seemed to intensify with her embarrassment. "Mrs. King?" Sarah said apologetically, struggling to redirect Ranger's attention. "I just don't understand it. He's never like this with anyone else." Before Laurel could respond, her mother-in-law's crisp voice cut through the commotion. "Really, Laurel," Denise said, having insisted on accompanying her to this appointment. "You're practically radiating nervous energy. No wonder the poor animal is reacting this way." Laurel bit her lip, fighting back tears. "I'm not trying to—" "Of course you're not trying to," Denise interrupted, her tone managing to be both dismissive and patronizing. "But all this anxiety isn't good for the baby. You need to get it under control." The words stung, especially since Laurel had been doing her best to stay calm, despite the growing discomfort in her abdomen. She pressed her hand against the spot where the pain seemed to concentrate, trying to massage it away. "Everything okay?" Blake asked, joining them after parking the car. His expression held concern, but Laurel could see the underlying tension, the same look he got whenever he feared she might make a scene. "She's working herself up again," Denise informed her son, "and that dog is feeding right into it." Ranger's barking grew more frantic, drawing the attention of Dr. Conrad Hale, who had been observing from the nurse's station. He approached carefully, notebook in hand. "Mrs. King," he said quietly, positioning himself between Laurel and the still agitated Ranger. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" "Dr. Hale, I'm sure you have more important things to do than investigate a nervous dog," Denise interjected. Conrad kept his attention focused on Laurel. "It will only take a few minutes, if you don't mind." Blake shifted uncomfortably. "We have an appointment with Dr. Klein." "We have time," Laurel said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. The constant dismissal of her concerns was wearing thin, and Dr. Hale was the first person who seemed genuinely interested in understanding what was happening. They moved to a quiet corner of the waiting room, though Ranger's eyes never left Laurel, his whines now replacing the barking. "How frequently has this been happening?" Conrad asked, pen poised over his notebook. "Every single time I come in," Laurel replied. "It's getting worse, too. He used to just bark, but now he seems desperate, almost." Conrad nodded, making notes. "And you've never had any previous interactions with Ranger before your pregnancy?" "No, I'd seen him around the hospital, but he never paid any attention to me before." "Has he reacted this way to any other pregnant women?" Laurel shook her head. "I asked Sarah, his handler. She said he's perfectly calm with everyone else, even in the maternity ward." Conrad's expression grew thoughtful. "And how have you been feeling? Any changes or concerns?" Laurel glanced toward Blake and Denise, who were watching the conversation with obvious disapproval. Lowering her voice, she admitted, "I've been having these pains. Nothing severe, just different." "Have you mentioned this to Dr. Klein?" "Yes, but she said it's normal. Everyone keeps telling me everything is normal." Laurel's voice cracked slightly. "But it doesn't feel normal." Conrad wrote something else in his notebook. "Trust your instincts, Mrs. King. You know your body better than anyone." "Laurel," Blake called out, checking his watch. "We're going to be late." In Dr. Klein's office, the familiar routine played out. The doctor's confident manner and dismissive smile remained unchanged as she reviewed Laurel's chart. "Still worried about our furry friend?" Dr. Klein asked, her tone making it clear how ridiculous she found the concern. "And she's having pains," Blake added, earning a grateful look from Laurel. Dr. Klein waved a hand. "All perfectly normal at this stage. Your body is adjusting to the pregnancy." "But Ranger," Laurel began. "Mrs. King," Dr. Klein cut her off. "I understand that first-time mothers can be anxious, but you can't let a dog's behavioral issues affect your peace of mind. Everything is progressing exactly as it should." After the appointment, Laurel stood in the hospital bathroom, staring at her reflection. The face looking back at her seemed tired, worried, exactly the kind of nervous energy Denise had criticized. But as she placed her hand over the spot where the pain lingered, Laurel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In the hallway, she heard Ranger start up again, his barks echoing through the building. She closed her eyes, remembering Dr. Hale's words about trusting her instincts. The realization hit her with sudden clarity. She was the only one. The only patient Ranger reacted to, the only one who triggered this response in him. Whatever was causing his behavior was specific to her pregnancy. The question was, what was he trying to tell them? And would anyone listen before it was too late? Walking back to the car, Laurel could hear the staff's good-natured jokes about Ranger's girlfriend following her. Blake's hand on her back was meant to be comforting, but it felt like pressure to smile, to act normal, to stop causing concern. Denise's running commentary about the importance of staying calm only added to her growing sense of isolation. But something had shifted inside Laurel. The embarrassment that had initially colored these encounters was giving way to something else, a deep-seated anxiety that couldn't be dismissed as easily as Ranger's warnings. She was the only one he reacted to, this way, and that had to mean something. Whether anyone else believed it or not, Laurel knew with increasing certainty that Ranger was trying to tell them something important. The only question was whether anyone would figure it out in time. Laurel pressed her hand against the cool tile of her bathroom wall, waiting for the wave of dizziness to pass. The room had started spinning while she was getting ready for work, forcing her to stop mid-motion. These episodes were becoming more frequent, and the sharp pain in her abdomen wasn't helping matters. "Honey?" Blake's voice came through the door. "You okay in there?" "I'm fine," she called back automatically, though the words felt hollow. "Just need a minute." She caught her reflection in the mirror. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes. She looked exactly like someone who wasn't sleeping well, which she wasn't. Every night, she lay awake, wondering if she was crazy for being so worried or crazy for letting others talk her out of her concerns. At work, Laurel tried to focus on her billing reports, but the constant discomfort made it difficult to concentrate. The pain had changed over the past week, becoming more localized and intense. She shifted in her chair, trying to find a comfortable position. "Mrs. King?" She looked up to find Dr. Conrad Hale standing by her desk, his expression concerned. "Dr. Hale, hi. I noticed you seemed uncomfortable during Ranger's therapy rounds earlier. Are you feeling all right?" Laurel hesitated. After weeks of being dismissed, she'd grown cautious about sharing her symptoms, but Conrad's gentle demeanor and genuine interest made her want to open up. "The pain's getting worse," she admitted quietly, "and I keep getting dizzy spells. Dr. Klein says it's all normal, but your instincts are telling you otherwise," Conrad finished for her. "Yes." Laurel felt tears threatening. "Everyone thinks I'm being dramatic. Blake tries to be supportive, but I can tell he thinks I'm overreacting. And his mother—" She trailed off, not wanting to criticize her mother-in-law. "What does Dr. Klein say about doing additional scans?" "She won't order them. Says they're unnecessary and would just be an added expense." Laurel's voice trembled. "She told me I need to stop letting my anxiety create problems where there aren't any." Conrad's expression darkened. "Mrs. King, I want you to know something. Ranger was trained as a medical detection dog before being reassigned to therapy work. His behavior toward you isn't random or meaningless." "Really?" Laurel sat up straighter, wincing at another sharp pain. "Yes, and in my professional opinion his reactions are too specific and consistent to ignore." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've worked with medical detection dogs for years. They can sense things we can't, chemical changes, cellular abnormalities. When they alert this persistently, there's usually a reason." Before Laurel could respond, another wave of dizziness hit her. She gripped the edge of her desk, breathing deeply until it passed. "Mrs. King?" Conrad's voice was urgent now. "How often is this happening?" "Several times a day now," she whispered. "But Dr. Klein says—" "I think you need a second opinion," Conrad interrupted firmly. "Immediately." As if on cue, Ranger's distinctive bark echoed down the hallway. He was making his afternoon rounds with his handler, and as usual, his whole demeanor changed as soon as he caught sight of Laurel. The German Shepherd's body went rigid, his amber eyes locked on her midsection as he began barking frantically. "I'm sorry," Laurel apologized to Conrad, feeling the familiar flush of embarrassment. "He does this every time now." "Don't apologize," Conrad said, watching Ranger intently. "Look at his body language. He's trying to tell us something specific." Ranger strained against his leash, whining between barks. His handler, Sarah, tried to calm him, but the dog remained fixated on Laurel. "I've never seen him this agitated," Sarah admitted, looking worried. "It's getting worse every day." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by Ranger's commotion. Laurel saw the familiar mix of concerned and amused expressions. A few people were whispering and pointing, and she heard someone make a joke about Ranger's favorite patient. The scene was interrupted by Dr. Klein's sharp voice. "What's all this disruption about?" She strode toward them, her heels clicking against the floor. Upon seeing Laurel, she sighed. This again? Really, Mrs. King, we need to address this anxiety of yours. It's affecting the entire hospital now. Dr. Klein, Conrad stepped forward. I believe Mrs. King needs additional testing. As the overseer of the hospital's animal therapy program, I have serious concerns about Ranger's continued alerts. With all due respect, Dr. Hale, you're a veterinarian, Klein said dismissively. I've been practicing obstetrics for 20 years. Mrs. King's pregnancy is progressing normally. She's experiencing increased pain and frequent dizzy spells, Conrad persisted. Common symptoms in the second trimester, Klein replied. Mrs. King, we discussed this at your last appointment. Everything is fine. Laurel felt trapped between them, her head spinning with more than just dizziness. Ranger's frantic barking continued in the background, matching the pounding of her heart. She started, then stopped, as another sharp pain hit her. Something feels wrong. What feels wrong is this constant state of anxiety you're working yourself into, Klein said firmly. It's not healthy for you or the baby. I think we need to discuss some relaxation techniques at your next appointment. Ranger lunged forward suddenly, nearly pulling free from Sarah's grip. His barking had taken on a desperate quality that made Laurel's skin crawl. That's enough, Klein declared. Sarah, please remove him from this area. Mrs. King, I suggest you take the rest of the day off and get some rest. Clear your head. As Sarah led the still barking Ranger away, Laurel felt something inside her crumble. The pain in her abdomen throbbed, and tears burned behind her eyes. She'd spent so long trying to convince herself that everything was fine, trying to believe the doctors and her family. But watching Ranger being dragged away, still trying desperately to warn them, she couldn't deny her fears any longer. Something was wrong. She felt it in every painful breath, every dizzy spell, every sleepless night. The baby she'd waited so long for was in danger, and no one except a dog and a veterinarian seemed to believe her. Mrs. King, Conrad's voice was quiet but firm. Don't let anyone make you doubt what you're feeling. Your instincts and Ranger's behavior are telling us something important. Laurel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She gathered her things with shaking hands, aware of the lingering stares from her co-workers. The walk to her car felt endless, each step accompanied by pain and worry. In the privacy of her vehicle, she finally let the tears fall. The weight of being dismissed, of having her concerns minimized, of being told repeatedly that she was imagining things, it all came crashing down. Ranger's desperate barking echoed in her memory, a warning that everyone but Conrad seemed determined to ignore. She placed her hand over her stomach, feeling the flutter of movement within. I hear you, she whispered, to both the baby and to Ranger. I know something's wrong. I just don't know what to do about it. The admission brought both terror and relief. Terror because she was now certain something was seriously wrong, and relief because she'd finally stopped trying to convince herself otherwise. But the question remained. What could she do when the very person meant to help her refused to listen? Conrad Hale sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of folders and documents. The soft glow of his computer screen illuminated his tired face as he dug through Ranger's records for the third time. Something about the German Shepherd's behavior nagged at him, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. There has to be more here, he muttered, clicking through digital files. The basic records showed Ranger's certification as a therapy dog, but Conrad's instincts told him there was something deeper. A knock at his office door made him look up. Come in. Sarah, Ranger's handler, stepped inside. You wanted to see me about Ranger's history? Yes, please sit. Conrad gestured to the chair across from his desk. I need to know everything about his training before he came here. Sarah settled into the chair, looking thoughtful. Well, I only started working with him 6 months ago when the therapy program expanded. But I know he came from a specialized training facility in Oregon. Which one? Conrad leaned forward, suddenly alert. The Western Medical Detection Institute, I think. They mainly train dogs, for therapy work now, but they used to do something else. She trailed off, trying to remember. Conrad's fingers flew across his keyboard. The Institute's website loaded, and his eyes widened as he read. Medical scent detection, he breathed. They were pioneers in training dogs to detect various medical conditions through scent. He quickly pulled up Ranger's complete file from the Institute. Here it is. Ranger wasn't originally trained as a therapy dog. He completed 2 years of medical detection training, specifically focusing on identifying cellular abnormalities and internal complications. Sarah's eyes widened. But why was he transferred to therapy work? Budget cuts, Conrad read grimly. The hospital couldn't fund a dedicated detection program, so they reassigned him to therapy duties. He sat back, running a hand through his hair. This changes everything. Just then, they heard familiar barking from the hallway. Conrad rushed to his office door, Sarah close behind. Ranger stood firmly planted in Laurel's path, refusing to let her pass. His posture wasn't aggressive, but determined. "I'm just trying to get to the break room," Laurel explained, looking exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she held one hand protectively over her belly. Blake King stood nearby, his frustration evident in his tense shoulders and clenched jaw. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Someone needs to control that dog." "Ranger is under control," Conrad said firmly, approaching the group. "He's doing exactly what he was trained to do." "Trained to harass my pregnant wife?" Blake demanded. "No," Conrad replied calmly. "Trained to detect medical problems." He turned to Laurel. "Mrs. King, I've just discovered something important. Ranger isn't just a therapy dog. He was specially trained in medical detection before coming here. His behavior isn't random or emotional. He's actively signaling that something's wrong." Laurel's hand tightened over her stomach. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew he was trying to tell us something." "This is absurd," Blake interrupted. "You're encouraging her anxiety. Dr. Klein has repeatedly said everything is fine." "Blake, please," Laurel pleaded. "Just listen." Conrad pulled out his tablet, showing them Ranger's training records. He spent 2 years learning to detect various medical conditions through scent. The program was cut for budget reasons, but his training didn't disappear. He's not barking because he's upset or poorly trained. He's desperately trying to alert us to something his nose is telling him is dangerous. Ranger whined softly, pressing against Laurel's legs. His amber eyes looked up at her with clear concern. "The pain is getting worse," Laurel admitted quietly. "And the dizziness, I nearly fell in the shower this morning." Blake's expression softened slightly with worry, but he shook his head. "Dr. Klein says these are normal pregnancy symptoms. She's the expert, not a dog." "Actually," Conrad countered, "in terms of detecting medical issues through scent, Ranger is very much an expert. Dogs like him have been proven to detect various conditions before conventional medical tests can catch them. Their sense of smell is incredibly sophisticated." He showed them more documentation about the success rates of medical detection dogs. They can identify cancer, detect oncoming seizures, alert to dangerous blood sugar levels. Their abilities are remarkable and scientifically documented. "But why would he react to Laurel specifically?" Blake asked, his certainty beginning to waver. "Because something's wrong," Laurel said firmly, her voice stronger now. "I've felt it for weeks, but everyone kept telling me I was just being anxious. Ranger's been the only one who seemed to understand." Conrad nodded encouragingly. "Medical detection dogs don't make mistakes like this. If Ranger's consistently alerting to something, we need to take it seriously. Blake ran a hand through his hair, looking torn. But Dr. Klein has been wrong before, Conrad interrupted gently. No doctor is infallible, but Ranger's nose doesn't lie. The fact that his reactions have been escalating suggests whatever he's detecting is getting worse. Ranger barked once, sharp and clear, as if confirming Conrad's words. He remained firmly positioned beside Laurel, his body language protective. The question is, Conrad continued, what exactly is he detecting? Without specific tests, we can't know what condition or complication he's alerting to. But his behavior makes one thing clear. There's definitely something that needs investigating. Laurel swayed slightly, and both men moved to steady her. I need to sit down, she murmured. They helped her to a nearby chair, Ranger never leaving her side. The dog's attention remained fixed on her midsection, his concern evident in every line of his body. Look at him, Conrad said softly. This isn't normal therapy dog behavior. He's in full medical alert mode, trying desperately to communicate what his training tells him is dangerous. Blake watched Ranger, then looked at his wife's pale face. The conflict was clear in his expression, as his instinct to trust authority battled with the evidence before him. Maybe, he started hesitantly, maybe we should get a second opinion, just to be safe. The pain's getting sharper, Laurel said, wincing, and it's spreading up my side now. Conrad frowned. Those symptoms, combined with Ranger's alerts, this can't wait for a second opinion. You need immediate testing. Dr. Klein won't order any, Blake pointed out. Then we'll go over her head, Conrad said firmly. I'm officially documenting my concerns as a medical professional, based on Ranger's training and behavioral indicators. That should be enough to force the issue. He turned to Sarah. Please get Ranger's complete training records from my office. We'll need them to support our case. As Sarah hurried away, Conrad knelt beside Laurel's chair. We're going to figure this out, he promised. Ranger's been trying to warn us, and it's time we listened. Ranger pressed his head against Laurel's knee, his eyes never leaving her belly. His previous frantic barking had settled into watchful alertness, but his message remained clear. Something was wrong, and time was running out to address it. Blake took his wife's hand, his earlier frustration replaced by growing concern. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner, he said quietly. To both you and Ranger. Laurel squeezed his hand, managing a small smile despite her pain. What matters is that you're listening now. Conrad stood, his determination evident in his stance. Let's get those tests ordered. It's time to find out exactly what Ranger's been trying to tell us. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor seemed to waver and dim as Laurel made her way toward the billing department. Her steps were unsteady, and she pressed one hand against the wall for support. The other hand cradled her swollen belly, where sharp pains had been intensifying all morning. Ranger, who had been walking nearby with his handler for his usual therapy rounds, suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His ears pricked forward, and his body went rigid with attention. Before anyone could react, he pulled free from his handler's grip and bounded toward Laurel. The world tilted sideways. Laurel felt her knees buckle as black spots danced across her vision. Ranger's barking echoed through the hallway, sharp and frantic. The sound seemed to come from far away, as though she were underwater. Laurel! Conrad's voice cut through the haze. She felt strong hands catching her before she could hit the floor. Someone get a wheelchair now! Ranger's barking grew more intense, a continuous stream of desperate alerts that drew curious faces from nearby offices and patient rooms. The German shepherd circled Laurel and Conrad, his body language screaming distress. I'm okay, Laurel tried to say, but the words came out slurred. Just got a little dizzy. You're not okay, Conrad said firmly, helping her into the wheelchair that a nurse had quickly brought over. "And Ranger knows it. We're getting you checked out immediately." Dr. Klein's clicking heels announced her arrival before her sharp voice cut through Ranger's barking. "What is going on out here? This is completely unacceptable." She surveyed the scene with obvious displeasure. Laurel slumped in the wheelchair, Conrad kneeling beside her, and Ranger still barking urgently. A small crowd of staff and patients had gathered to watch. "Dr. Klein," Conrad said, standing to face her. Mrs. King nearly fainted. "Given her symptoms and Ranger's continued alerts, we need to order a full scan immediately." "This is ridiculous," Klein snapped. "That dog is creating chaos in my hospital, and you're enabling this disruption. Mrs. King is experiencing normal pregnancy symptoms, as I have repeatedly explained." Ranger's barking grew even louder, as if protesting her dismissal. His handler tried unsuccessfully to quiet him. "Normal pregnancy symptoms don't cause near-fainting spells," Conrad countered, his voice steady but firm. "And medical detection dogs don't give false alerts this consistently. Ranger's background and training—" "I don't care about the dog's background," Klein's voice rose sharply. "I care about maintaining order in this hospital and preventing unnecessary panic among my patients. You are completely overstepping your bounds, Dr. Hale. You're a veterinarian, not an obstetrician." Laurel's cheeks burned with embarrassment as more people stopped to stare. Part of her wanted to shrink into the wheelchair and disappear. But another part of her felt a surge of gratitude toward Conrad for finally saying what she'd been too afraid to say herself. "With all due respect," Conrad continued, standing his ground, "my expertise with medical detection animals is entirely relevant here. Ranger's behavior indicates a serious medical issue that requires immediate investigation. Ignoring these warnings is dangerous." Klein's eyes flashed with anger. "How dare you suggest I'm putting my patient at risk? I've been practicing medicine for 20 years. I will not have my judgment questioned by a veterinarian based on a dog's behavior." 20 years of experience doesn't make you infallible," Conrad said quietly. "And dismissing clear warning signs doesn't make them go away." A shocked murmur went through the gathered crowd. No one usually challenged Dr. Klein so directly. "This is fear-mongering, pure and simple," Klein declared. "You're causing unnecessary stress to my patient and disrupting hospital operations. I will be filing a formal complaint about this unprofessional behavior." Ranger's barking had subsided to a low, continuous growl. He planted himself firmly between Laurel and Dr. Klein, his protective stance unmistakable. "File whatever complaints you want," Conrad replied. "But Mrs. King needs proper testing, and she needs it now. If you won't order the scans, I'll go directly to the chief of medicine." Laurel's vision swam again, and she gripped the wheelchair's armrests tightly. The pain in her abdomen had spread to her lower back, sharp and insistent. "Dr. Klein," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, something's wrong. I can feel it." For a moment, something flickered across Klein's face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or fear. But it was quickly replaced by her usual mask of professional authority. "This discussion is over," she said coldly. "Mrs. King, I'll see you at your next scheduled appointment. Dr. Hale, I suggest you stick to treating animals and leave human medicine to qualified professionals." She turned on her heel and strode away, dismissing them entirely. The crowd began to disperse, but Laurel could hear their whispered conversations. "I'm so sorry," she said to Conrad, mortified by the whole scene. "You shouldn't have gotten in trouble because of me." "Don't apologize," Conrad said firmly. "You have nothing to be sorry for, and this isn't over. I meant what I said about going to the chief of medicine." Ranger whined softly and pressed his head against Laurel's knee. Despite her embarrassment, she felt a profound sense of relief. Finally, someone was taking her concerns seriously. Finally, someone was willing to fight for her. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching down to stroke Ranger's head. "Both of you. We're going to figure this out," Conrad promised, his voice gentle but determined. "Ranger's been trying to tell us something important, and it's time everyone listened." He straightened up and took hold of her wheelchair. "First, let's get you somewhere quiet to rest. Then I'm going to make some calls. Dr. Klein may not want to order those tests, but she's not the only doctor in this hospital." As Conrad pushed her wheelchair down the hallway, Ranger padding faithfully beside them, Laurel closed her eyes against fresh tears. She felt drained and shaky, but also strangely hopeful. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone in her fears. Behind them, the whispers continued, and Laurel knew there would be consequences from this confrontation. But right now, all that mattered was that someone had finally stood up and demanded answers. Someone had finally believed that her concerns, and Ranger's warnings, were worth fighting for. After the confrontation with Dr. Klein, Conrad found himself working late in his office, reviewing Ranger's training records. A soft knock at his door made him look up. Sarah Chen, one of the ultrasound technicians, stood in the doorway, nervously glancing over her shoulder. "Dr. Hale, do you have a minute?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Of course, come in." Conrad gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sarah slipped inside and closed the door quietly behind her. She pulled a folded paper from her scrub pocket with trembling hands. I shouldn't be doing this, but after what happened today in the hallway..." She took a deep breath. "I can't keep quiet anymore." Conrad leaned forward, noting her obvious distress. "Take your time, Sarah. What's this about?" "It's about Mrs. King's early pregnancy scans." She smoothed out the paper on his desk. "This is a copy of the initial notes from her 12-week ultrasound. Look at the bottom section." Conrad studied the document carefully. There, in neat technical writing, was a notation. "Possible mass detected near placental attachment. Recommend follow-up imaging." But the note had been crossed out with heavy black ink and initialed with Dr. Klein's distinctive MK. His stomach tightened. "When was this?" 6 weeks ago." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "Dr. Klein said she'd reviewed it personally and determined it was just a shadow artifact. She ordered me to amend the records. But I've been doing this job for 15 years, Dr. Hale. What I saw..." She shook her head. "It wasn't a shadow." Conrad sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "And no follow-up scan was ever ordered?" "No. Mrs. King's subsequent appointments have all been basic vitals checks. Dr. Klein hasn't scheduled any additional imaging." Sarah's voice cracked. "I should have said something sooner, but Dr. Klein... She has so much influence here. I was afraid..." "You're doing the right thing now," Conrad assured her. "May I keep this copy?" Sarah nodded. "I made it before the original was altered. Just please be careful how you use it. I have 3 kids to support. I can't lose this job." "I'll protect your identity," Conrad promised. "Thank you for coming forward." After Sarah left, Conrad stared at the paper for a long time. The evidence in his hands confirmed his worst fears. There was a medical reason for Ranger's behavior, and Dr. Klein had deliberately concealed it. But how could he reveal this without causing Laurel additional trauma? The next morning, he observed Laurel and Blake in the hospital cafeteria. They sat across from each other, but the distance between them seemed vast. Laurel pushed her food around on her plate, while Blake checked his phone. "The chief resident said Dr. Klein is one of the most respected OBs in the state," Blake was saying. "We need to trust her experience, honey. All this stress isn't good for the baby." Laurel's shoulders slumped. "I know you think I'm being paranoid." "I didn't say that." Blake reached across the table to pat her hand. I just think you're letting that scene yesterday get to you. Dr. Hale meant well, but he's not qualified to make these kinds of judgments. Ranger isn't wrong, Laurel said quietly. I can feel it, Blake. Something's not right. Laurel. Blake's voice took on an edge of frustration. It's a dog. An animal. Dr. Klein is a highly trained physician. Who should we trust? Conrad's grip tightened on his coffee cup as he watched tears fill Laurel's eyes. The isolation she was experiencing from her own husband made the situation even more delicate. He couldn't just drop this bombshell without considering the emotional impact. He found himself thinking about the cases he'd worked with medical detection dogs in the past. Their accuracy rates were remarkable, often catching things human doctors missed. Ranger's behavior wasn't random. It was a trained response to a genuine threat. Later that morning, he passed Laurel in the hallway. She was moving slowly, one hand pressed to her side. Ranger, who was working with another patient, immediately began barking and straining toward her. Mrs. King, Conrad called out. Could I speak with you for a moment? She turned, and he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the strain showing in her face. Of course, Dr. Hale. He led her to a quiet consultation room, helping her settle into a chair. Ranger's handler had followed them, unable to calm the agitated dog. I know yesterday was difficult, Conrad began carefully, but I want you to understand why I'm so concerned. Ranger isn't just a therapy dog. He was originally trained in medical detection. His reactions to you are consistent with how these dogs respond when they detect serious health issues. Laurel's hands twisted in her lap. I want to believe that means something, but everyone keeps telling me I'm overreacting. Even Blake. Her voice caught. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just being silly. Conrad felt the weight of the folded paper in his pocket. He had to find a way to tell her about the scan without completely shattering her trust in the medical system or her marriage. You're not being silly, he said firmly. Your instincts and Ranger's warnings deserve to be taken seriously. I'm working on gathering evidence that will help us convince Dr. Klein to order new tests. I just need you to hold on a little longer. I'm trying. Laurel wiped at her eyes. But I feel so alone in this. Blake thinks I should just trust Dr. Klein blindly. He doesn't understand why I can't let this go. You're not alone, Conrad assured her. I know this is frightening, but we're going to figure this out. I promise you that. He watched her leave, the copied ultrasound note feeling like it was burning a hole in his pocket. The truth needed to come out, but timing was crucial. One wrong move could make an already fragile situation much worse. Walking back to his office, Conrad's mind raced with possible approaches. He needed to build an irrefutable case, one that would force Dr. Klein to acknowledge the danger and order proper testing. But he also needed to find a way to help Blake understand why his wife's fears were valid. The tampered scan note was damning evidence, but using it required careful consideration. Sarah's career needed protection, and Laurel's emotional well-being had to be prioritized. Most importantly, they needed to act before whatever Ranger was detecting became a crisis that couldn't be reversed. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hospital windows as Conrad strode purposefully down the corridor, the copied ultrasound note clutched in his hand. His patience had run out. After a sleepless night weighing his options, he'd decided direct confrontation was the only path forward. He spotted Dr. Klein near the nurses' station, speaking with Blake and Denise King. Laurel sat quietly in a nearby chair, her face drawn with exhaustion. Ranger, who was supposed to be working with patients in the pediatric ward, had somehow slipped away from his handler again and lay protectively at Laurel's feet. Dr. Klein, Conrad called out, his voice carrying clearly down the hallway. We need to discuss Mrs. King's case, now. Klein's shoulders stiffened as she turned. Dr. Hale, I've already warned you about interfering with my patients. This isn't interference. Conrad held up the ultrasound note. This is about a documented finding that was deliberately hidden. Blake stepped forward, frowning. What are you talking about? I'm talking about an early scan that showed a possible mass, Conrad said firmly. One that was noted and then crossed out without any follow-up imaging. Color drained from Klein's face, though she quickly recovered. That's a confidential medical record you have no right to access? Someone felt concerned enough to make sure I saw it, Conrad replied. Just like they should be concerned about Ranger's continued reactions. He was trained in medical detection before joining the therapy program. His behavior isn't random. He's warning us something is seriously wrong. This is completely inappropriate, Denise cut in. You're just upsetting everyone with wild speculation. Laurel struggled to her feet, one hand pressed against her side. Please, can't we just do another scan? Just to be sure? Absolutely not, Klein snapped. I won't order unnecessary tests because a dog barks. This is becoming ridiculous. Ranger growled low in his throat, positioning himself between Laurel and Klein. The dog's hackles were raised, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by fierce protectiveness. Look at him, Conrad insisted. In all his years of service, he's never behaved this way with any other patient. These dogs have accuracy rates above 90% in detecting medical issues. Why would you ignore such a clear warning sign? Because I am the doctor here, Klein's voice rose sharply. Not you, and certainly not some animal. Security. She waved to the guards stationed near the entrance. Please remove Dr. Hale from this area. He's harassing my patient. The only harassment happening here is your refusal to properly evaluate a high-risk pregnancy, Conrad shot back. Mrs. King needs comprehensive imaging, and she needs it now. Blake stepped between them, his face flushed. That's enough. Dr. Klein has been nothing but patient with all this drama. Laurel, we're leaving. Now. Blake, please, Laurel's voice shook. What if he's right? What if something really is wrong? The only thing wrong here is letting this continue, Denise said sharply. Blake, take your wife home before this gets even more out of hand. 2 security guards approached, moving to flank Conrad. Klein turned to address the gathered nurses and staff, who had stopped to watch the confrontation. Let me make something absolutely clear, she announced. Anyone who encourages this kind of baseless fear-mongering will face serious consequences. I will not have my medical judgment questioned based on a dog's behavior. Ranger's barking grew more frantic as Blake tried to help Laurel toward the exit. The dog planted himself firmly in their path, refusing to move. Get that animal under control, Klein demanded. He's trying to protect her, Conrad insisted, even as the guards took hold of his arms. This is exactly how medical detection dogs react when they sense immediate danger. You're putting her life at risk. Blake, Laurel pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Something's wrong, I can feel it. Why won't anyone listen? Because you're being hysterical, Blake snapped, then immediately looked regretful. I'm sorry, honey, but this has to stop. We're going home. Mrs. King, Conrad called out as the guards began moving him towards the exit. Don't give up. Trust your instincts. Trust Ranger. He knows something's wrong. That's quite enough, one of the guards said firmly. Let's go, Dr. Hale. Klein turned to the nurse's station. Note in Mrs. King's chart that Dr. Hale is not to be allowed anywhere near her during future appointments, and get that dog back to the pediatric ward where he belongs. The handler had finally caught up with Ranger, but the German Shepherd refused to budge, his body trembling with tension as he maintained his protective stance in front of Laurel. I'll have that animal removed from the therapy program entirely if this continues, Klein threatened. This behavior is completely unacceptable. Laurel's soft sobs echoed in the suddenly quiet hallway as Blake and Denise led her away. Ranger's whines of distress followed them until they turned the corner. Conrad watched helplessly as the guards escorted him toward the hospital exit, his mind racing. The confrontation had gone exactly as he'd feared, with Klein circling the wagons and using her authority to shut down any questioning of her judgment. But he couldn't shake the sick feeling that time was running out. The copied ultrasound note felt heavy in his pocket, evidence of negligence that somehow wasn't enough to break through the wall of denial surrounding Laurel. He had to find another way to help her before it was too late. Ranger's desperate behavior made it clear the situation was reaching a critical point. As he was led out of the building, Conrad could still hear the German shepherd's distressed barking echoing through the halls. The dog wouldn't give up trying to warn them, even if everyone else refused to listen. The question was, how much longer could Laurel hold on while they ignored those warnings? The security guards released him at the parking lot entrance, with a stern warning about causing further disruptions. Conrad stood there for a long moment, watching the hospital doors slide closed, knowing Laurel was trapped inside a system that was failing her. The morning sun felt cold on his face as he considered his next move. He had pushed too hard and lost his access to help her, but he couldn't give up. Not when he knew with absolute certainty that Ranger's behavior meant Laurel's life was in danger. The autumn evening cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as Laurel made her way toward the entrance for her evening appointment. Her steps were slower than usual, each movement careful and measured. The sharp pains that had been coming and going all day seemed to be getting worse. Blake walked beside her, his jaw set in a tight line after their argument at home. Denise followed close behind, her high heels clicking against the pavement. The tension from that morning's confrontation still hung heavy between them. "You don't have to come in with me," Laurel said softly. "I know you both think I'm being dramatic." "We're not leaving you alone, not after that scene this morning," Denise replied. "The last thing we need is that veterinarian trying to corner you again." Blake reached for Laurel's arm as they approached the stairs. "Here, let me help you." "I'm fine," Laurel insisted, though her hand instinctively pressed against her side. The pain was getting sharper, more insistent. She gripped the metal railing, trying to catch her breath. 3 steps up, the world tilted sideways. White-hot agony ripped through her abdomen, stealing her breath. Her vision tunneled to pinpoints of light. "Blake!" she gasped, her knees buckling. Time seemed to slow as she felt herself falling. Blake lunged forward but couldn't reach her in time. Denise's scream echoed across the parking lot. From inside the hospital came a crash, followed by frantic barking. Ranger had been in the pediatric ward when something made him suddenly rear up, knocking over chairs and medical equipment. Before anyone could stop him, he bolted through the doors and down the hallway, his nails clicking frantically against the floor. The German shepherd burst through the entrance doors just as Laurel crumpled on the stairs. His desperate howls cut through the evening air, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "Oh God, Laurel!" Blake gathered her into his arms, his face white with fear. "Someone help, please!" Denise stood frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth, all her previous certainty shattered by the sight of her daughter-in-law's deathly pale face. Ranger's barking grew more urgent. He positioned himself by Laurel's head, alternating between high-pitched whines and sharp, commanding barks that echoed off the building walls. Hospital staff came running from multiple directions, drawn by the commotion. Among them was a young ER doctor who took one look at the situation and snapped into action. "Get me a gurney, Stat," she ordered, "and page the on-call OB team." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Nurses carefully transferred Laurel onto the gurney while checking her vital signs. Her blood pressure was dangerously low and dropping. "She's 8 months pregnant," Blake explained, his voice shaking. "She's been having pain, but her doctor said everything was fine." "Who's her doctor?" the ER physician asked as they rushed down the hallway. "Dr. Klein," Denise answered. "She's the head of obstetrics." The doctor's expression tightened. "Page Dr. Klein," she told a nurse. "But get radiology on standby. We're doing an emergency scan regardless." Dr. Klein said no more scans. Blake started to protest, but his words died as Laurel let out a weak moan. "Your wife is in critical condition," the doctor said firmly. "We're past the point of waiting for consultations." Ranger followed the gurney, refusing to leave Laurel's side. For once, no one tried to stop him. His earlier warnings now seemed less like disruptions and more like desperate attempts to prevent exactly this scenario. They rushed Laurel into the emergency department where a team was waiting. Monitors beeped urgently as they transferred her to an exam bed. "Blood pressure 70/40 and falling," a nurse called out. "Pulse is thready." "Get an IV started and call for O-negative blood," the ER doctor ordered. "Where's that ultrasound machine?" Dr. Klein burst through the doors, her face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing? This is my patient!" "She's crashing," the ER doctor snapped back. "Look at her stats. We need imaging now." "I've been monitoring this pregnancy for months. There's nothing wrong except anxiety." Klein's words were cut off by the harsh sound of alarms as Laurel's blood pressure dropped even lower. Ranger's frantic barking joined the cacophony of beeping monitors. "Get that dog out of here," Klein demanded. "The dog stays," the ER doctor said firmly, "and either help with the scan or step aside, but I'm not losing this patient while we argue." The ultrasound technician was already setting up the machine. Blake gripped Laurel's hand, tears streaming down his face as he watched the medical team work. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have listened to you." Denise stood in the corner, her earlier certainty replaced by rising horror as she watched her daughter-in-law fight for her life. Everything she dismissed as overdramatic now seemed terrifyingly real. The room fell silent as the ultrasound image appeared on the screen. The ER doctor's expression grew grave. "There's a large placental abruption," she announced. "The baby's in distress. We need to get her to the OR now." "That's impossible," Klein protested, but her voice had lost its authority. "I would have seen signs." "Like the ones that Dog was trying to warn us about for weeks?" the ER doctor asked pointedly. She turned to the team. "Call surgery and tell them we're coming up. Every minute counts." As they prepared to move Laurel, Ranger finally grew quiet. He sat beside the bed, his amber eyes fixed on Laurel's face. His duty to warn finally fulfilled, though far later than it should have been. Blake and Denise watched helplessly as the team rushed Laurel toward the elevators. The ER doctor stayed behind briefly to explain. "The placenta has separated from the uterine wall," she said gently. "It's causing severe internal bleeding, which is why her blood pressure keeps dropping. They'll need to deliver the baby immediately and stop the bleeding." "Will they be okay?" Blake's voice cracked. "They're in the best possible hands now," the doctor assured him. "But I won't lie. If we'd caught this earlier, we wouldn't be in such a critical situation." Denise sank into a chair, her face ashen. "That dog knew," she whispered. "All this time he was trying to tell us and we wouldn't listen." Ranger patted over and rested his head on her knee, as if offering forgiveness. His job was done. He'd finally made them understand. Now it was up to the surgical team to save both Laurel and her baby. Blake stared at the elevator doors that had closed behind his wife, his whole world balanced on the edge of disaster. All the warnings had been there, from Laurel's intuition to Ranger's desperate alerts to Conrad's passionate advocacy. He'd ignored them all in favor of blind trust in authority, and now Laurel was paying the price. The walk to the surgical waiting room felt endless. Each step was heavy with regret, fear, and the desperate hope that they hadn't realized the truth too late. The surgical team huddled around the high-resolution monitor, their expressions growing more concerned with each passing second. The scan images painted a stark picture that none of them had expected, a dark mass clearly visible against the lighter tissue. "Dear God," the lead surgeon breathed. That's a significant placental tumor. Look at the blood flow patterns. It's growing aggressively. Blake's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the wall for support, his face draining of color as the full impact of what they were seeing hit him. Beside him, Denise pressed her trembling hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "All this time," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She knew something was wrong. She tried to tell us." The tumor filled the screen, an undeniable threat that had been silently growing while Laurel's concerns were dismissed. The mass was already dangerously large, pressing against critical blood vessels and threatening both mother and child. Dr. Klein pushed her way forward, her professional demeanor cracking as she stared at the unmistakable evidence. "We should consult with oncology first," she said quickly. "Perhaps schedule a biopsy." "There's no time," Conrad interrupted firmly. He had remained calm, his focus entirely on the necessary next steps. "The pressure on those vessels is critical. Any delay could be catastrophic." Laurel, still groggy but conscious enough to understand, reached for Blake's hand. "How bad?" she managed to ask. The lead surgeon spoke directly to her, his voice gentle but urgent. "The tumor has compromised the blood supply. We need to perform an emergency C-section immediately to save you both." Dr. Klein stepped forward again, her authority a reflexive habit. "As her primary physician, I recommend we take 24 hours to—" "No." Laurel's voice was weak but determined. She fixed Dr. Klein with a steady gaze. "You don't make my decisions anymore. I want a different doctor." The room fell silent. Even in her weakened state, Laurel's rejection of Klein's authority rang clear. The months of dismissal, of being told her fears were imaginary, had finally reached their breaking point. Blake squeezed her hand, his tears falling freely now. "I'm so sorry, honey. I should have believed you from the start." Denise moved closer to the bed, her usual composure shattered. "We all should have listened," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "That wonderful dog tried to warn us and we just laughed it off." The surgical team continued their preparations with practiced efficiency, but the weight of what had nearly been missed hung heavy in the room. The tumor had been growing all along, validating every one of Laurel's intuitive fears and Ranger's desperate warnings. Conrad stayed near the head of the bed, his calm presence a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil around him. "The surgical team here is excellent," he assured Laurel. "You made the right choice. You're both going to get the care you need now." Dr. Klein stood frozen at the edge of the room, her professional world crumbling as she confronted the magnitude of her mistake. The evidence was undeniable. She had missed something critical, something that could have been caught much earlier if she'd only listened. "I'll have my lawyers contact the hospital," she said stiffly, turning towards the door. "Dr. Klein," the lead surgeon called after her, "I suggest you stay nearby. There will be questions that need answering." The anesthesiologist approached with his cart. "We need to begin now," he said firmly. "Mrs. King, we're going to take excellent care of you and your baby." Laurel nodded, her strength returning now that she finally felt heard and believed. The fear was still there, but it was different now. A clean, honest fear that could be faced head-on, not the maddening doubt of being told her instincts were wrong. "I love you," Blake whispered, kissing her forehead before stepping back to let the surgical team work. "I'll be right here waiting." The monitors beeped steadily as the team began their final preparations. The scan images remained on the screen, a stark reminder of how close they had come to tragedy and how many weeks of warning they had ignored. The maternal-fetal specialist, Dr. Sarah Chen, arrived within minutes, her swift assessment confirming their worst fears. She studied the scans with practiced intensity, her expression grave but determined. "The tumor's location is precarious," she explained, pointing to critical areas on the display. It's affecting blood flow to both mother and baby. We need to move quickly." Laurel pushed herself up slightly on the bed, her voice stronger than before. "What are our options?" "We could try to stabilize and monitor for 24 hours, Dr. Chen began, but given the rapid growth pattern— "No more waiting," Laurel interrupted firmly. "I want the surgery now. I've spent months being told to wait while something was wrong. Not anymore." Blake gripped her hand tighter, his earlier uncertainty replaced by unwavering support. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you completely. I was wrong before, so wrong to doubt you. Never again." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "It's risky, but I agree. Immediate intervention gives us the best chance." Conrad stepped forward, holding Ranger's medical history files. "There's something else you need to know," he said urgently. "Ranger was originally trained in detecting blood clotting disorders. His reactions to Laurel might indicate additional complications we should prepare for." The specialist's eyes widened slightly. "Thank you. That's crucial information. I'll alert the surgical team to have additional coagulation factors ready." She turned to Laurel. "We'll need to move fast, but we'll be prepared for every possibility." Laurel took a deep breath, squeezing Blake's hand. "Then let's do it now. I trust my instincts this time, and I trust Ranger's." The room burst into focused activity as the surgical team began their preparations with renewed urgency. The weight of Laurel's choice hanging in the air, a decision that might finally bring truth to light and safety to both mother and child. The operating room erupted in a flurry of urgent activity as the surgical team worked to save both Laurel and her unborn child. The steady beeping of monitors suddenly transformed into shrill alarms as Laurel's blood pressure plummeted dangerously. "Blood pressure dropping to 70/40, called out the anesthesiologist, her voice tense. "We're losing her too fast." Dr. Chen's hands moved with practiced precision as she worked to remove the tumor while protecting the baby. "More suction here. We need better visualization." Outside in the sterile hallway, Ranger paced restlessly before the operating room doors, his whines growing more distressed with each passing minute. The German shepherd's sensitive ears twitched at every alarm, every rushed footstep of the medical team inside. "Her coagulation factors are off," one of the surgeons announced. "The bleeding isn't stopping normally." Conrad's research notes, spread across a side table, proved invaluable as the surgical team consulted them between critical moments. His detailed observations about the tumor's interaction with Laurel's blood chemistry helped them anticipate and counter each new challenge. "Get me Factor 7 and more platelets," Dr. Chen ordered, her focus unwavering. Just like Dr. Hale's notes predicted, the tumor's affecting her clotting cascade. The monitors screamed again as Laurel's oxygen levels began to drop. Ranger's whining outside intensified to a desperate keen, his instincts telling him what the machines confirmed. Laurel was fighting for her life. "Blood pressure still falling." The anesthesiologist's voice carried an edge of fear now. "We need to move faster." The surgical team worked with renewed urgency, their movements precise despite the pressure. Every insight from Conrad's research guided their responses as they fought to stem the bleeding and save both mother and child. The surgical team's coordinated efforts finally began to show results. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Laurel's vital signs, which had been plummeting just moments before, started to stabilize. "Blood pressure coming up, 90/60 and climbing," the anesthesiologist announced, relief evident in her voice. Through the chaos, a new sound filled the operating room, the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby girl. Dr. Chen lifted her above the surgical drape, pink and perfect, her tiny fists clenched in protest at the bright lights and cold air. "Time of birth, 11:47 p.m., called out a nurse, quickly wrapping the infant. "Apgar scores are excellent." With mother and baby stable, the surgical team turned their full attention to removing the tumor. They worked methodically, preserving tissue samples and carefully documenting everything. Each piece of evidence told the story of how long the mass had been growing, proof of Dr. Klein's negligence in ignoring the early warning signs. In the waiting room, Blake and Denise sat with tears streaming down their faces. The weight of their dismissal of Laurel's concerns crushed them both. "We should have listened," Denise whispered, her usual composure crumbling. All this time she knew something was wrong. Blake nodded, unable to speak through his guilt and relief. Down the hall, Conrad stood quietly with Ranger, who had finally settled once Laurel's condition stabilized. The veterinarian stroked the dog's head, grateful that the animal's instincts had ultimately helped save 2 lives. The hospital administrator arrived, grim-faced, to collect the initial documentation of Dr. Klein's case management. The evidence was damning, from the altered early scan to the documented dismissal of clear warning signs. Klein's reputation wouldn't survive this, nor should it. 3 months after that fateful night, Laurel King pushed a white and pink stroller through the hospital's main entrance. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass doors, catching the golden highlights in her hair. She looked healthier now, her cheeks filled with color, her steps steady and sure. In the stroller, little Sarah cooed and waved her tiny fists at the familiar faces of nurses and staff who stopped to greet them. At 12 weeks old, she was the picture of health, with bright eyes and chubby cheeks that dimpled when she smiled. Blake walked beside them, his hand resting protectively on the small of Laurel's back. The past months had changed him profoundly. Gone was the uncertain man who defaulted to others' judgments. In his place stood someone who had learned the hardest way possible to trust his wife's instincts. As they approached the hospital's therapy animal center, a familiar bark echoed down the corridor. Ranger bounded toward them, his tail wagging with excitement. Dr. Conrad Hale followed close behind, a warm smile spreading across his face. "There's our hero," Laurel said softly, kneeling down to embrace the German Shepherd. Ranger nuzzled against her, his tail sweeping back and forth across the floor. Then he gently approached the stroller, sniffing carefully at Sarah, who giggled and reached for his nose. "He's been waiting for this visit," Conrad said, watching the tender scene unfold. "I think he needed to see for himself that you both were okay." Laurel stood, wiping tears from her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you both enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When everyone else thought I was just being anxious or difficult, you two believed me. You fought for us." Blake stepped forward, extending his hand to Conrad. "We owe you everything," he said firmly. "I was wrong to dismiss what was happening. You and Ranger—" He paused, swallowing hard. "You saved my family." Conrad shook Blake's hand, but deflected the praise. "Ranger was the real hero. He knew something was wrong from the very first day. I just learned to trust what he was telling us." They moved to the center's quiet sitting area, where Laurel settled into a comfortable chair with Sarah in her arms. Ranger lay at her feet, maintaining his protective watch even now. The hospital board's investigation was completed last week, Conrad informed them quietly. Dr. Klein's license is under review, and they've implemented new protocols for responding to patient concerns. He smiled gently at Laurel. "Your case has already changed things for the better." "Good," Laurel said firmly, bouncing Sarah on her knee. "No one should have to fight so hard to be heard about their own body." Blake wrapped an arm around his wife's shoulders, pulling her close. "I've learned to be a better listener," he admitted, "to trust that Laurel knows herself better than anyone else does." They spent the next hour sharing updates and stories. Sarah was sleeping through the night now. Laurel was feeling stronger every day. The Kings were planning a small vacation once Sarah turned 6 months old. Through it all, Ranger remained close by, occasionally lifting his head to check on his special charges. As they prepared to leave, Laurel knelt one more time to hug Ranger. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered into his fur. The dog licked her cheek gently, as if to say he never would have. Standing in the doorway of the center, Conrad watched the family make their way back through the hospital corridors. The sight of Laurel pushing the stroller, Blake by her side, their heads bent together in quiet conversation, told the story of a family rebuilt stronger through crisis, a testament to the power of trust, instinct, and unwavering advocacy. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.